What if Adam wasn't the first human? For thousands of years, Adam has been considered the first man, the beginning of humanity, according to the biblical narrative. But some texts and ancient traditions whisper of a far darker and more mysterious truth, one that suggests there may have been a world before Adam, inhabited by beings long forgotten and wiped from memory. These whispers don't just raise questions, they offer answers that shake the very foundations of what we believe. In the opening lines of Genesis, we read, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." But the second verse is strange. "Now the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep." If God created everything perfectly, why was the world in chaos, dark, empty, and submerged in deep waters? Some ancient commentators believe this doesn't describe creation, but recreation. Something had happened, something terrible. And what we see in Genesis is the divine repair of a shattered world. This idea forms the basis of the gap theory, a belief that there is a hidden interval between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. In that gap, it suggested another life form, perhaps. Another civilization existed and was wiped out before the Adamic age began. A divine judgment, a catastrophic event, or even a celestial rebellion may have reduced the world to a wasteland. What followed was not the first creation, but the beginning of a new one. This concept isn't just speculation. In Jewish mysticism, especially in Kabbalistic teachings, we find a similar idea. The worlds before concept describes multiple failed creations before the current one. According to these ancient traditions, God attempted to create perfect worlds, but they shattered under the weight of divine energy. Our current world is the first that survived. But what lived in those earlier worlds? The Hebrew phrase, tahu, v'ebau, formless and void, isn't just about physical emptiness. It often implies destruction, ruin, or aftermath. In other biblical passages, it's used to describe places that have been laid waste by God's wrath. So when Genesis describes the earth in this way, it might be referring to a world already judged and destroyed. Some scholars suggest that the Genesis narrative is not merely historical, but symbolic, a compressed story that hints at deeper, older realities. Perhaps there were hominid beings already in existence, and when God created Adam, it wasn't the first biological human, but the first spiritual human one into whom the divine breath of life was blown. This would mark the beginning of conscious, God-aware humanity, not the dawn of life itself. And this brings us to the theory of pre-Adamic beings. The Bible does not outright say others existed before Adam, but it hints. Why does Cain fear being killed by others after killing Abel? Who are these others if Adam, Eve, and Cain are the only ones alive? How does Cain find a wife and build a city if no one else exists? These are not small narrative gaps. They are doorways into older stories that have been buried beneath the surface of Scripture. Some ancient texts, like the Book of Jubilees, or even early Christian Gnostic writings, speak of beings who fell from heaven or who lived on the earth before man. The implication is staggering, that Adam's line was not alone on earth, and that humanity began not with a single creation, but as a selection out of many. Nearly every ancient civilization speaks of a golden age, a time before time, where divine beings and humans coexisted. The Sumerians wrote of antediluvian kings. The Greeks told tales of the Titans. The Hindus spoke of previous yugas, cycles of creation and destruction. Is it possible that these stories all echo the same forgotten truth? If so, then the Genesis account, far from being simplistic, is the cover layer of a much older and more complex story, one deliberately veiled to protect or obscure a terrifying past. A past in which other races, civilizations, and possibly entire realms existed before the breath of God ever touched Adam's lungs. Was Adam truly the first, or was he the beginning of something else entirely, a divine replacement for a world long buried? What if others walked the earth before Adam, creatures not made in his image? The silence of Genesis is deafening. It tells us Adam was formed from the dust, placed into Eden, and given dominion. But that silence leaves space for speculation. Space? Who else might have lived on the earth before Adam was shaped by divine hands? Ancient apocryphal texts and esoteric traditions suggest the existence of races that preceded humanity, beings with intelligence, form, and will, but not necessarily created in God's image. These were not angels, nor men, but something in between. Some traditions refer to them as pre-Adamic spirits, shadow beings, or proto-humans, creations that did not bear the divine imprint of a soul, and thus lacked the breath of God. In Kabbalistic thought, the kings of Edom are described in Genesis 36 as rulers, who lived before any king reigned over the children of Israel. Many Jewish mystics interpret this as a cryptic reference to earlier worlds, earlier beings who rose and fell before Adam's story even began. These kings died one by one, possibly symbolic of failed creation souls that could not contain divine light. The Sumerian king list, written long before the biblical canon, speaks of monarchs who ruled for tens of thousands of years before the flood. Their reigns are impossibly long, spanning back into a mythic past. But are these exaggerated tales, or are they echoes of a lost race, beings whose power and longevity reflected something not quite human? Then there's the question of giants. The Bible introduces the Nephilim in Genesis 6, but their origin story is sudden, almost jarring. They appear right before the flood, as offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. But where did these sons of God come from? Some argue they were fallen angels. Others claim they were remnants of an earlier creation, entities born before Adam, surviving into his world. In some Gnostic writings, the world before Adam is described as a corrupted realm overseen by false gods or archons, who created flawed beings in imitation of the true God's design. Adam then becomes not the first man, but the first pure creation, a divine correction to an earlier error. This idea appears again in the Nag Hammadi texts, where alternate versions of Genesis suggest a battle between creators and Adam as a kind of divine retaliation. From another angle, the existence of pre-Adamic races can also be supported by the fossil record. Beth 1 reads it through a biblical lens. Homo sapiens may be recent, but Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other archaic humans walked the earth long before the estimated timeline of Adam. Were these beings soulless biological forms, or is it possible that these, too, were atoms, each given a time, a chance, and a test? But the Bible focuses on this Adam, perhaps the one who succeeded where others failed. This opens the door to an uncomfortable notion that history has repeated itself more than once, and that the Garden of Eden was not the first paradise, but the latest attempt to preserve the divine image in flesh. Cain's fear after killing Abel makes more sense in this light. He is terrified that others will find and kill him. But who are these others? The traditional answer is that Adam and Eve had more children, yet the text is silent about them until after Cain's exile. So again, was there already a population outside Eden, a race that witnessed Cain's crime and awaited judgment? Some early theologians tried to resolve this by suggesting Eden was not the entire earth, but a sacred enclosure within a wider world, already populated by beings of lesser light. In this view, Adam and Eve were placed into a holy zone set apart from a fallen creation that surrounded it. Once cast out, they re-entered a corrupted world. Cain's exile, then, is not from society but into it. Esoteric traditions even suggest that Cain himself was the offspring of one of these pre-Adamic or fallen entities, a hybrid being, a living sign that the worlds had already begun to intermingle. If true, Cain's building of a city would not be the founding of civilization, but a restoration of one long buried dot. The implications of this theory are staggering. it would mean that the fall was not the beginning of man's descent, but merely a continuation. That sin and exile did not start with Adam, but were inherited from beings that came before, and that we, modern humans, are not the first to walk this earth, but perhaps the last in a long, tragic line. If the world before Adam existed, where are its ruins? Where is the memory? Perhaps the most haunting mystery of the Pre-Adamic theory is not just that something came before us, but that it has been erased, wiped from the records, buried beneath myth, and remembered only in whispers. But even in silence, echoes remain. The Book of Job contains a strange verse. Have you walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Job 38-16-17. Many scholars read this as poetic metaphor, but others hear something deeper, reference to realms once inhabited, now sealed off. Apocryphal books like 2 Esdras and Jubilees speak of cycles, worlds created and destroyed, knowledge hidden, and timelines erased. In these views, Adam was not the first man, but the first man of this cycle. There were others before, and there may be others still to come. The Rephaim, mentioned in Deuteronomy and the Book of Isaiah, are often described as the shades, or spirits of the dead giants, whose origins are unclear. Were they the last remnants of a pre-Adamic race? Their cities, like Bashan, lie in ruins today, but local legends claim those ruins are cursed, haunted by ancient beings who never fully died. Enoch's visions describe a prison for angels and spirits in the depths of the earth. Could this be where the pre-Adamic ones now dwell? Watching, waiting, bound not by time, but by divine judgment, in Ugaritic texts and Sumerian myths. The earliest kings and gods are said to have ruled in a deep time, a prehistorical era of chaos and power only to vanish, leaving behind a fractured world for humanity to inherit. That mythic inheritance might be what Adam stepped into, a world both new and unspeakably old. Perhaps that is the secret. Adam was not the first, but the last attempt at purity, and the whispers we hear in our dreams, in old stories, in the bones buried beneath our feet, are not the beginnings of mankind, but its ghosts.